The events you're about to see are based on real accounts. To protect the identities of those involved, names and details have been changed. My name is Josh, I'm 32 years old, and I live in Amarillo, Texas. I'm sharing this because what happened to me and my family in that house still terrifies me. It's been over 5 years now, and I still can't explain everything that went on. The memory of those events haunts me, even though they've stopped happening. But that day, that night, I can't get over it. Maybe writing it down here will help me, or maybe you'll understand what I went through. It all started when we moved into a new house. It was in a quiet neighborhood, just on the outskirts of town, with trees all around. My wife, Emily, and I were excited. Our little boy, Luke, was only 5 years old, and we thought the place would be perfect for him to grow up. The house was old, a little rundown, but it had this charm to it that made us want to move in. The first few days were normal, as we unpacked and settled in. I remember the smell of fresh paint in the air and the way the sun streamed through the kitchen windows. But then, on the 4th night, things started to get strange. It was a typical evening. Luke had gone to bed. Emily and I were watching TV in the living room. At around 10 p.m., I heard a faint sound, like something scratching against the floor. I turned to Emily, asking if she had heard it too. She looked at me, confused. We paused the TV, and we both listened carefully. The sound came again, a light scratching, almost like nails on wood. But it wasn't coming from the walls or the ceiling. It was coming from under the bed in Luke's room. At first, I thought it was just a rodent or something, maybe a mouse or a squirrel stuck in the walls. So I went to check. I opened Luke's door and the room was dark except for the faint glow from the hallway light. I walked over to his bed, knelt down, and peered underneath it. There was nothing there. No mice, no bugs, nothing. But that feeling of being watched crept up on me. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as my imagination. Luke was asleep, so I went back to the living room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The scratching continued for the next few nights. It would always happen after Luke went to bed. At first, it wasn't too loud, but it was persistent. It was as if something or someone was trying to get out from under the bed. Emily heard it too eventually, and we both agreed it was creepy, but we never spoke about it too much. We tried to convince ourselves it was just the house settling, the wind, or something else rational. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. One evening, when the scratching got louder, I decided to do something about it. I set up a camera in Luke's room. It was a small, cheap camera I had bought online, something I could easily hide. I set it up in the corner of the room, pointing directly at the bed. I made sure to tell Emily not to say anything to Luke the next day. I didn't want him to feel scared, but I needed to know what was causing those sounds. I didn't expect to see anything out of the ordinary, but when I checked the footage the next morning, my heart dropped. The scratching wasn't just a sound. In the video, I could see a shadow moving quickly under the bed, as if something was crawling beneath it. The shadow would dart around, and then it would stop for a moment, only to start again. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or the camera malfunctioning, but no, this was different. It was unmistakable. I showed Emily the footage, and her face turned pale. She was freaked out, but we couldn't talk about it openly. I didn't want to worry Luke. I thought about calling someone, maybe a paranormal investigator, but I felt stupid doing that. I wasn't the type of person who believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, but this was beyond the ordinary. Things only got worse after that. The scratching increased in intensity, and then the whispers started. They were soft at first, barely audible, but they were unmistakable. They came from the same place, the corner of the room under Luke's bed. I remember the first time I heard it. I was sitting on the couch trying to watch TV when I heard a faint voice. It sounded like a woman's voice, but the words were too muffled to make out. I stood up and turned off the TV, trying to listen more closely. The voice came again, this time clearer. It was whispering Luke's name. Luke. Luke? I froze. Emily wasn't in the room with me. It was just me and Luke, who was still sleeping upstairs. I went upstairs immediately and the house felt cold. I don't know how to explain it, but the air felt thick, heavy. I entered Luke's room, but everything seemed normal. He was still asleep, curled up under his blanket, I knelt by his bed and touched his forehead. He was warm, but I could still feel that lingering chill in the room. I turned off the camera that night. I had enough of it. The following night, Emily and I decided to sleep in the living room, just to be safe. We set up a mattress on the floor, but the sounds didn't stop. I could hear the scratching, louder now, coming from under Luke's bed again. But something else was different this time. There were footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps that echoed in the hallway. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't want to move. I couldn't move. The footsteps came closer and then stopped outside the living room. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't bring myself to check. I just lay there in the dark, pretending to be asleep. I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually the footsteps faded and the house went quiet again. We couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I called a priest to come bless the house. I thought it might help, maybe bring some peace to the place. The priest came, but he didn't find anything out of the ordinary. He said a prayer and sprinkled holy water around the house, but after he left, things didn't change. The sounds, the whispers, the shadows, they all continued. Finally, after a few more nights of sleepless terror, we made the decision to leave. We packed up everything and moved out of that house, just like that. We didn't want to risk it anymore. We left without saying a word to anyone, not even our neighbors. We never found out what was causing the noises or the shadows. I still don't know what to believe. Maybe it was something paranormal, maybe it wasn't. But whatever it wasn't just in my head. The camera footage was proof of that. I've never told anyone the whole story, until now. I just wanted to share it here in case anyone else has experienced something similar. Maybe someone can explain it to me. But I'm done with that place. I'll never forget what happened there. My name is Grace. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a small town near Fresno, California. I want to share something that happened to me a while ago. It's been years, and I still have trouble believing it myself. I've never told anyone the full story, but after reading some of the things posted here, I feel like maybe it'll help me get it off my chest. It all started about 6 months ago. At first, I thought it was just stress from work, or maybe my imagination getting the better of me. But things got so weird, so quickly, that I can't just brush it off anymore. It was a quiet Thursday night, the kind of night where you just want to lay in bed, wrap yourself up in the covers, and forget the world. I live alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. The bedroom is cozy with soft lighting and a large bed against the far wall. For a few weeks, I noticed something odd happening whenever I'd try to fall asleep. It felt like something was gently tugging at the sheets, like a hand slowly pulling the blanket off my body. At first, I convinced myself it was just me being overly sensitive, or maybe even the air conditioning kicking up drafts. But the tugging felt too intentional. It didn't feel like wind or a random shift in the sheets. I started sleeping with the lights on, but even with the comfort of light, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The feeling of being watched became stronger every night. It wasn't like the typical feeling of fear where you think you might be imagining things. It was something real. One night, I finally decided to ignore the discomfort and go to sleep as usual. I felt the tug again, but this time it was harder, more forceful. I could actually feel the sheets move downward, like they were being dragged under the bed. I pulled the covers back up, convinced that it was nothing but my mind playing tricks on me. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling noise coming from underneath the bed. It was subtle, but it was there. I froze, holding my breath. The rustling continued for a while, and I felt a cold sweat form on the back of my neck. I didn't dare look. If I did, I was afraid of what I might see. By this point, I was desperate for answers. I wasn't going to just lie there in fear every night. So I came up with a plan. I grabbed my phone and set it up to record the room while I slept. I figured that if I could capture something on video, I might finally understand what was going on. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to see, but I felt a little less crazy knowing that I could prove I wasn't just imagining things. That night, I went to bed early and made sure the camera was rolling. I didn't feel sleepy at all, my mind racing with the possibility of what I might find. I forced myself to close my eyes, and the familiar tugging sensation came again, but this time it felt even more real, more deliberate. I clenched my fists under the covers and waited, trying to ignore the creeping panic building inside me. The rustling noise came back too, louder this time, almost like something was moving under the bed. I had to see it for myself. The next morning, I watched the footage. My heart pounded in my chest as I went through the video frame by frame. At first, everything looked normal. The bed was undisturbed and I was lying there, sleeping soundly. But then, at around 2:37 a.m., I saw it. A pale, thin hand emerged from beneath the bed, reaching out slowly, the fingers curling around the corner of the sheets. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. The hand moved with an eerie, unnatural precision, pulling the blanket gently as if it were alive. It wasn't a trick of the light or a shadow. It was real. I could even see the pale, sickly tone of the skin, and the fingers had an unsettling, almost too long appearance. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with questions. Was it a person? A prank? But no one else had been in my apartment, and the hand didn't look human. It felt wrong. I've watched that video 100 times now, but it still gives me chills every time. I've never been able to explain what I saw. After that night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about the hand and the idea that someone was living under my bed. I started leaving the lights on, but it didn't help. The hand came back again and again, pulling the covers, rustling beneath the bed. It was like whatever was under there was becoming bolder, more insistent. But I couldn't stop looking. I couldn't ignore it. A few days later, I finally had enough. I called a friend to help me move my bed, to see if there was anything under there. We both looked, but the space was empty. There were no wires, no hidden objects, nothing that could explain the pulling. But I could feel something, an oppressive energy, like the room was thicker, heavier somehow. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I even asked the landlord if anything strange had happened in the building before, but she just brushed it off. She said that the building was old and had some quirks, but nothing that could explain what I was feeling. I tried researching online, looking for any similar experiences. I found a couple of threads about strange happenings in older homes, but nothing that matched what I had seen. That's when I started to wonder, what if it wasn't a ghost? What if it was something worse? I didn't want to think about that, but the thought crept in. A couple of weeks passed, and the hand kept coming back. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. Eventually, the pulling stopped, and the rustling noise faded. I'd like to say that I felt relieved, but I didn't. It was like the silence itself became suffocating. The hand didn't come back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still under the bed, waiting for the right moment. It's been months now, and the room feels normal again, but I can't forget what happened. I never saw the hand again, but the fear that something might still be lurking there stays with me. Maybe it'll come back one day, maybe not. Either way, I can't forget that pale hand reaching for me in the dark. My name is Kyle, and I'm 38 years old now. What I'm about to tell you happened about 6 years ago, when my wife Sarah and I moved into an old house in a quiet little town in Massachusetts. The house was spacious, with a huge backyard for our son, Mason, who was 3 years old at the time. Everything seemed perfect. We got the house at a good price, and even though it was over 100 years old, it seemed well kept. But from the start, something felt wrong. I'm not the type of person who believes in supernatural things. I've always been down to earth, explaining everything with logic and reason. So, when Mason started talking about the boy under the bed, I thought it was just a vivid imagination. Kids invent imaginary friends all the time, right? The problem was that this started happening more and more frequently. Every night at bedtime, Mason would look under the bed and whisper a good night before the lights went out. At first, I even thought it was funny. Things got stranger when he started insisting that I leave a glass of water by the bed for the boy. When I asked him about this boy, he said his name was Thomas and that he liked to play hide and seek. Sarah and I even joked that we should charge rent to our son's imaginary friend, but I was sure it was just kid stuff. Until I started hearing the sounds. It was always late at night. when the house was completely silent and Mason had been asleep for hours. Faint sounds, like muffled laughter and small footsteps running down the hallway. I'd get up, look around, but find nothing. The first time this happened, I thought it was just the old house creaking, but as the days passed, it became harder to ignore, and Sarah started hearing it too, especially the laughter. One night, I was in the kitchen, making tea for Sarah and myself, when I distinctly heard the sound of a child laughing. It was muffled, like someone was trying to hold back the sound. When I rushed to Mason's room, he was sleeping deeply. It made me uneasy, but I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just the wind passing through the cracks in the windows, I thought. Maybe the neighbors. I wanted to believe that. But the next week, I was putting Mason to bed when he looked at the empty space under the bed and said, "Thomas said you're nice. You like taking care of me." The phrase sent a chill down my spine. I asked how he knew that, and he just shrugged and said Thomas told him. That's when I realized this was going too far. But what could I do? How could I deal with something I didn't even know was real or just a product of my son's imagination? Sarah and I decided to take Mason to a child therapist. We wanted to make sure it wasn't anything serious, that Mason wasn't suffering from some psychological issue. The therapist assured us that it was normal for children his age to have imaginary friends. She advised us not to discourage Mason from talking about Thomas, but also not to encourage it. We were to let things follow their natural course. The following weeks were calm. No laughter, no strange sounds. I began to relax, thinking maybe it really was just imagination after all. Until one random night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. But this time, they weren't far away. They were inside Mason's room. I got up with my heart racing and went straight to his room. As soon as I opened the door, I saw Mason sitting on his bed, staring at the floor with a sleepy smile. I asked what he was doing awake, and he just replied, "Thomas called me to play." This time, fear hit me hard. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting in the chair in his room, trying to understand what was going on. In the morning, Mason acted like nothing had happened. Sarah tried to convince me I was overreacting, but I knew something was wrong. That night was enough for me to realize that this wasn't going away just because I wanted it to. I started investigating. I asked Mason about Thomas, but he got upset when I insisted on the subject. It seemed like the boy was becoming more and more real to him. I tried to find information about the house to see if any child had died there, but I couldn't find anything. It was just an old house with a common history, but that didn't explain what we were going through. The climax came one night when Sarah and I were in the living room watching TV. Mason had been in bed for over an hour when we clearly heard the sound of laughter coming from the hallway. I froze. Sarah looked at me with wide eyes, and I knew she'd heard it too. I went to Mason's room, but even before opening the door, I heard what sounded like a low voice talking to him. My whole body froze. I rushed into the room, and Mason was fast asleep. After that night, the laughter and footsteps stopped, as if nothing had ever happened. Mason also stopped talking about Thomas. He didn't even remember the boy under the bed anymore. As much as I wanted to believe that it was over, the fear is still there. Whenever I walk past his room at night, I expect to hear something. A laugh, some sound. Anything that proves I wasn't crazy. But nothing. Only silence. To this day, I don't know what happened in that house. I don't know if it was just a child's imagination or if there was something more. I just know that I can't forget those laughs. And honestly, I don't think I ever will. My name is Lucas. I'm 35 years old. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and I'm going to tell a story that happened to me about a year ago. But even today, it still gives me chills just thinking about it. What happened to me was so strange, so inexplicable, that I don't even know where to begin. Sometimes, I still lie awake at night, remembering the whispers and the fear I felt back then. If I had known, maybe I would have done things differently, or maybe none of this would have happened. It all started on a normal night. I was living alone in a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I've always been a calm guy, not many worries. But one day, something strange started happening. Every night, at exactly 3 a.m., I would hear a whisper coming from under my bed. I don't know how to explain it. but it was as if someone was there, right beneath, whispering words I couldn't understand. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, who doesn't hear strange things at night, right? But this happened night after night. I tried to ignore it, but as the days went by, the whispers started to become clearer. It was as if something was watching me, waiting for me, and the sound from under the bed kept getting louder. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't anything. Maybe it was the pipes, or the wind hitting the windows, or even the old building making noises. But I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I looked at the clock and saw it was 3 a.m., my heart would race. I knew the whispers were about to start, and I didn't know what to do. One night, after hearing the whispers, I gathered the courage and decided to see what was going on. I got out of bed, trying not to make any noise, and crouched down to look under the bed. There was nothing. No objects, no movement, nothing but the cold floor and darkness. I stayed there for a while, listening carefully, but the sound had stopped. My mind was confused, but I told myself that it was probably just my imagination. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I started to feel a presence, something I couldn't see but was there. An uncomfortable sensation, as if a shadow was watching me. It was then that, one of those nights, I decided to record audio while I tried to sleep. I placed my phone next to the bed, turned on the recorder, and let it record, hoping to catch some sound that would explain what was going on. I was tired of feeling like I was losing my mind. The recording was simple. I just left the device on while I tried to sleep. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. I was afraid what I might hear. I picked up the phone and put on my headphones. When I started listening to the recording, I was shocked. In the middle of the audio, right in the middle of the silence, I heard a clear and distinct voice. It was a low, whispering voice, but there was no denying what it said. "I'm down here." I froze. It was as if someone was there, right beside me, saying that with the intention of scaring me. And honestly, I didn't know what to do with that. I tried to find explanations. Was there something wrong with my phone? Maybe some kind of interference or a strange noise I hadn't noticed. I listened to the recording several times, trying to find a rational explanation. But there was no denying that the voice was there, speaking directly to me. It wasn't a normal sound. It wasn't something that could be easily explained. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to share this with some close friends, hoping to find an explanation. But the answers I received only heightened the feeling that something very strange was going on. As the days passed, the whispers continued every night, and the voice seemed to get closer. I was running out of options. Every time that hour came, 3 a.m., I felt an increasing sense of dread. The idea of sleeping seemed impossible, and the feeling of something watching me never went away. I didn't know what was real anymore. How could I explain such a clear and distinct voice coming from under my bed? I began to lose control. To this day, I still wonder if it was real or if I just went crazy from the fear. But I couldn't find a logical explanation for it. The last time I heard the voice, something happened that made me think that maybe it wasn't safe to stay in that apartment anymore. I was almost asleep when suddenly the whispers started again. But this time, the voice didn't say, "I'm down here." Instead, it just remained silent, as if waiting for something. I looked around, but there was nothing. Nothing visible, at least. The cold feeling increased, and the air felt denser, as if the environment was charged with something I couldn't see. It was at that moment that I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave. I packed up all my things and left. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't talk about it with anyone. I just moved out, and I never returned to that apartment. The nights I spent there, hearing the whispers, marked me in a way I still can't explain. To this day, I still wonder if what happened was real, or if I just went crazy from the fear. The strangest part is that after I moved, the whispers stopped. I never heard anything again. But the feeling that something was there under the bed still haunts me. I don't know what it was or why it happened, but I can guarantee I never want to experience something like that again. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like to support the community. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. See you next time.